So I'm going to turn things over to Jason. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rob, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being present here this afternoon, and everyone taking the extra effort to learn a bit more about this vaccine. I think, as Rob just mentioned, we are certainly at a critical turning point in managing this pandemic, with everything that has changed in our social lives and in our work lives. We initially looked towards this vaccine, back when this first emerged back in March. That was the initial discussion. Well, all we have to do is wait until we get to a vaccine, and then, we'll cross that next threshold towards trying to resume some sense of normalcy. The goal for this presentation is to, hopefully provide some additional insight into the, reality that we're dealing with here now with this virus, the current vaccine candidates that are going to be available here in the US, the mRNA mechanism behind the two candidate vaccines that we're likely to receive first, as well as, the safety and efficacy and rigorous trials that these vaccine candidates have gone through, what our local distribution plan is going to be here in Gunnison. And then I'm going to cover some initial frequently asked questions, and then we'll open up to more of a general question and answer forum from there. So with this virus that has caused this pandemic, we have to, again, recognize that, if you look at the data from yesterday, over 200,000 individuals were, tested and came back positive yesterday across the country. We have now over 3,000 individuals who are losing their lives, yesterday, and upwards of 2,500 to 3,000 individuals daily. So massive impact. We've seen severe disease from many individuals in our community and at large. There's considerable, serious risk of infection, both to you as an individual as well as to your family and surrounding context. So we have to recognize. Furthermore, we have very limited treatment options that are available. So, here, Gunnison County, we're continuing to reach out about other therapies aside from dexamethasone and steroids, which we do have available in-house, but other more novel treatments such as remdesivir, which has, conflicting data for some individuals in terms of its effectiveness, but monoclonal antibodies, certain regimens and cocktails that you may be reading about are, essentially at a lottery basis here in Colorado, and very, very limited. Beyond that, we have to recognize that there's potential long-term health issues after recovering from COVID-19. So I'm sure we all have friends, family, neighbors, close contacts who may have recovered from their initial infection, but still don't feel like they're back to their usual selves. And, we're still learning about the long-term effects of this virus. And lastly, we don't know whether getting COVID-19 is actually going to protect an individual against getting it again, and how long that protection might last. There's emerging case reports that have been coming out over the past several months of people acquiring this again, and so we're still learning more about that natural immunity, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. All of that is supposed to provide some background for this essentially risk-benefit discussion. I think people have concerns about a vaccine or any new potential treatment outside of a vaccine, and in any conversation that we have as healthcare providers, it comes back to that underlying risk benefit. So I think we have to recognize that there's a profound risk that is still present with this virus at large, both on an individual basis as well as a population basis. And as hopefully we'll walk through, this vaccine appears to be very effective and very safe. So these are the main 4 candidates that we're looking at that we're likely going to receive here in the US. The 2 on the left, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, as well as the Moderna vaccine, those are the 2 mRNA-based vaccines, which we're going to focus on most today, as those are the 2 that are have impending, likely FDA emergency use authorization or EUA approval. They're 2-dose regimen vaccines. Those day intervals are flip-flops. So Pfizer's actually a 21-day interval for the second dose, and Moderna's 28-day interval for the second dose. And as you can see, they're highly effective, which we'll talk about more in depth here. The Pfizer has ultra cold storage requirements, which we do have available here in Gunnison County, and that's how we've become a regional distribution hub. The two on the right are more traditional vaccine mechanisms. The Janssen or Johnson & Johnson and the Oxford, also known as the AstraZeneca vaccines, those both use a non-replicating kind of viral vector vaccine like we've used previously with flu immunizations and other vaccines in the past. And we're still waiting on additional information for their phase 3 trials, and we'll learn more about those in the coming months, and they'll likely get approval more in the first quarter of 2021. So the mRNA vaccine mechanism behind the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, again, which we're likely to gain access to the Pfizer vaccine, hopefully as early as next week. This is a newer technology. It's not brand new. They were studying this back in the early 2000s with SARS and MERS and prior viruses, and they've looked at treating other viral diseases. The longstanding issue is about how to keep that mRNA or that genetic code stable long enough to produce an immune response and get it into the cells appropriately. So I'm going to provide just a quick kind of biology 101 update on how this mechanism works. And on the left here, if you look at this is a model of a coronavirus that has its own kind of mRNA genetic code, and there's these spike proteins or spikes that are on the outside of it, and that's how the virus ultimately enters your nasal tract or upper respiratory tract, your lungs, to cause the initial infection. And so what they've done is they've extracted just the portion of that spike protein mRNA gene. They've put in these lipid soluble molecules, which are illustrated here on the right. And once an individual is vaccinated, these small lipid molecules containing the mRNA get taken up by your muscle cells, and our own cells utilize their own mechanism to create these spike proteins, and then it gets shown or demonstrated on the outside of the cell. And as your own immune system recognizes that spike protein is not from within your own body, or otherwise known as foreign, it gets taken up. There's a whole cascade of events in which helper T cells and B cells, which you can see here on the right, interact to produce antibodies, which work more or less like a lock and key mechanism to surround the virus as it initially tries to enter your body or infect you as an individual. So these antibodies surround the virus and prevent those spike proteins from taking hold. And then beyond that, there's a whole cascade within your immune system that produces a more long-lasting immune response to remember those spike protein elements, hopefully several months and potentially years down the line. But there's still a lot to learn about how long this immunity will last from either acquiring COVID or from the vaccine itself, like we'll talk about. So both of these mRNA vaccine candidates require 2 injections, either 21 or 28 days apart, to prime the immune system well enough to fight off the virus. The important thing that we want to learn, both as as healthcare providers and as an individual receiving these vaccines, is it safe and does it work? So a lot of people are concerned about the, accelerated timeline under which these vaccines are being developed. And I think as a background as well, it's important to note that the really accelerated timeline that happened with these vaccine development, this whole process, especially with the mRNA technology, but all the candidates involved, was that there was unprecedented science that it was able to take place, because as everyone's knocking 2020 as a bad year, it's, we're actually at a, I think, impressive point in which human technology has developed to create an early ability to detect the genetic code of this virus. So scientists were able to establish in early January, just weeks after this was initially discovered, they were able to detect that the genetic code and develop the process in which to administer this vaccine. And all that happened in very impressive timeline, through kind of open sharing of information across the world that was really unprecedented. But beyond that initial development, we're still utilizing the same rigorous trials and approach that we've used, for decades now to appropriately vet a new medication or a new vaccine. So these phase 1 and phase 2 trials look first at safety within small groups, and then is it effective in slightly larger groups, and then these individual candidate vaccines have moved into phase 3 trials, which we're now seeing the initial kind of 3-month and beyond results of, demonstrating larger safety profiles and larger effectiveness within 44,000 individuals for Pfizer, up to 38,000 in the Moderna vaccine. And all of these groups are continuing to enroll, additional thousands of individuals to follow more specific groups within our population. So I know there's a lot of concern in which people feel like they might be the guinea pigs for receiving this vaccine. I think it's important to note that there are tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who I look at as true heroes, who have stepped forward and received this vaccine within the past several months, and have allowed us to get to this point where we can say that it is safe and that it is effective. After this initial approval process, which is actually undergoing right now, the FDA, CDC, public health are all going to continue to monitor, safety as we roll this out to a broader population. So there's the longstanding vaccine adverse event reporting system, or VAERS, that we as healthcare providers will monitor our own local community, our own population, and that's going to be happening across all communities across the U.S. There's a safety data link that further studies possible side effects, and then the CDC and FDA are going to encourage recipients of this vaccine as well to use this new vSafe app, which will allow an individual to download to their smartphone and then provide additional updates in terms of how they themselves as an individual are doing after having received this vaccine, and be in direct contact with CDC clinicians and follow-up individuals to ensure that we're appropriately monitoring this on a large scale. It'll also have a convenient reminder or kind of push update that'll remind you to get that second dose as well, which is important. So again, beyond determining that it's safe, we want to make sure that it works and it's effective. The Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine, we're both seeing 94.6, 94.5, so 94, 95% effectiveness. When we initially were looking towards determining if a vaccine was going to be effective, the goal, the benchmark was going to be 50%. And with these numbers, I think we've far exceeded those initial expectations. On some flu years, the flu vaccine might be 30 or 40% effective, and that's just the reality of the complexity and challenge in developing an effective vaccine. So I think it's really a testament to the phenomenal work that's been done in developing this. And to break that down, those numbers down, you follow these people over several months, and for Pfizer, within their observation, that phase 3 trial, they saw 169 individuals develop COVID early on, compared to 9 individuals in the vaccine group. For Moderna, they had 90 in the placebo group develop COVID, compared to 5 in the vaccine group. And we're going to continue to get additional information again as more and more people within these trials, as well as a broader population, acquire this vaccine, just in terms of in determining how effective it is in preventing mild disease, asymptomatic transmission, or as well as severe disease. But as you see below, what's important to me as a emergency physician, and should be important to all of us as healthcare providers, as we recognize that our regional ICUs continue to operate essentially at capacity, that the early data is showing that these vaccines are very effective in preventing severe disease for individuals. So the Moderna vaccine prevented that severe disease in 100% of individuals, and only one individual in the Pfizer group developed severe disease. And it's important to note that what they classify as severe disease is any kind of oxygen saturation less than 94%, as well as a supplemental oxygen requirement. So that one individual that developed severe disease within that Pfizer trial, had an O2 sat of 93% at follow-up, which for us here at altitude would be a normal resting oxygen saturation. But that individual never went to the hospital and never required further more intensive care. A huge question for a lot of individuals, and what I think we get the most questions about at this point, is what are potential side effects. So on the left, these are the most common solicited side effects, and it's in order of frequency. And this was information from the Pfizer trial, but is also reflected in the early data we've seen from the Moderna trials. So people are noting injection site pain, some localized reactions, fatigue, some headaches, muscle pain, chills, joint pain, and fever. For a majority of individuals that do develop any of these symptoms, they were reported as mild to moderate for a majority of individuals. And as you can see here on the right, they were typically more frequent after that second dose compared to the first dose, which makes sense. Again, as we were talking about earlier, that second dose is really meant to boost your immune response, boost your antibody response after your immune system's been primed after that first dose. It's also worth noting that these side effects or responses were less frequent for individuals over 55, and typically come on within 1 to 2 days and last about 24 hours on average. For me as an individual, as a physician, I am okay with developing some of these more mild to moderate side effects. For me, it tells me that my body is developing an appropriate immune response, and this is not you acquiring COVID, but it's your body recognizing that it needs to produce these antibodies and ramp up and produce an appropriate immune response that's hopefully going to last an extended period of time and prevent you from having a longer lasting infection if you did not get the vaccine. So as we recognize that people even with mild to moderate COVID are sick for 10 days, 14 days, and those with more significant or severe infections, have symptoms lasting 2 to 4 weeks and beyond that. And then we were further talking about the recovery timeline. So for me, 24 hours of some of these symptoms here on the left, I am very much okay with. Beyond those more mild reported side effects, the thing that a lot of people have questions on is, serious events. So serious adverse events, what they were looking at were uncommon, so less than 0.5%. And they for the people both who were running the trials as well as outside investigators at the FDA, they recognized that these were medical events that occur in the general population at the same frequency as observed in the study. And what that means is that if you follow 44,000 people or tens of thousands of people in the general population across all age groups with known medical conditions, people are going to develop other medical problems such as strokes or irregular heart rates, or they're going to develop appendicitis or other conditions that we see in the general population. And the serious adverse events that we report as those, again, just occurred at the similar frequency as observed in the study. And there was nothing that stood out really significantly to the investigators at a broader level or at a higher incidence. And importantly, as well as we're looking at a broad population, they didn't see any specific safety concerns within smaller subgroups by age, whether older individuals or younger individuals, different races, ethnicities, or comorbidities. So people with high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune conditions didn't seem to have an increased level of side effects or adverse events compared to the broader group. And important as well, and we'll talk about this here a little bit more in a few minutes, but people with prior COVID infection, did not seem to have, a more intense or severe immune response, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, a suppressed immune response because they had prior COVID and because they got this vaccine. And as we're all paying attention to the, emerging news updates about other countries who are rolling out this vaccine, the UK, on Tuesday, a couple of days ago, started their mass vaccination campaign with the Pfizer vaccine. And they had 2 individuals that seemed to have a more severe allergic reaction upon receiving this. And their regulators are recommending that people with a history of severe allergic reactions, so individuals who carry an EpiPen, hold on getting this vaccine for the time being. And what I think we're going to need is a little bit more time to follow up with those individuals and look more into, obviously there's a huge spectrum of people with severe allergies who carry EpiPens for either environmental reasons, whether that's like, a bee sting or food allergies, versus people who have more, true, medication allergies. So I think more to come on that. This is just a quick graphic from a recent study that came out last week in the New England Journal of Medicine. But what it's showing, and I don't think my cursor can necessarily help point out a couple of these figures, but what it's showing is the antibody response for individuals after getting the Moderna vaccine. And you can see that the arrows pointing to 1 and 29 represent those first and second doses. And you can see after that first dose, you get an initial increase in antibodies, but it really takes that second dose at that day 28 or 29 interval to get that boosted antibody response. And what's impressive to me and important is that you see that antibody response carry out that's the 3-month time mark, and it drops down a little bit, but people still have high levels of circulating antibodies, at the 3-month mark across all age groups, which particularly for our older individuals who we know are more susceptible to severe infection, appear to have a durable and high antibody response an extended period of time. And we're going to need more time, and these individuals are going to continue to get followed for 6 months, a month out, 18 months, to see how long that lasts and what other components aside from antibodies in terms of more of that memory immune response are effective at those later dates. So a question that I've gotten frequently is how, are we going to need a second vaccine, or I guess you could say maybe a third dose if this is a 2-dose regimen for these initial batches? Are we going to need a third dose in a year? Or what is that timeline going to look like? We still just do not have enough information, and we're going to continue to follow that to determine when that next vaccine regimen would be needed. For trying to recognize that we're going to get limited dose allocation of this vaccine early on, the Colorado Department of Public Health, CDPHE, this is their recommended phased approach, which was just updated yesterday. And so for your friends, family members, we can anticipate the spring for higher risk individuals, so people who are older than 65, underlying medical conditions, and I'll let you read through those other groups, getting this vaccine or other vaccine candidates in more of the first quarter, second quarter of 2021, and then broader to the general public, likely not until the summer for 18 to 64-year-olds without high risk conditions. So I hope that's covered or provided some initial background for people. I again, put together some questions that I've already gotten and kind of know that are floating out there in the general population. So, one question that comes up is, can I get COVID from the vaccine? As we've, touched on earlier, these candidate vaccines, cannot give someone COVID-19. These mRNA vaccines and the other candidate vaccines just code for that spike protein, and they're not live COVID-19 viral vaccines. Furthermore, with these mRNA vaccines, they don't interact with our DNA in any way. This mRNA never enters the nucleus of the cell, which is where our DNA or genetic material is kept, and the cell, breaks down and gets rid of that genetic code or that blueprint soon after it's, finished using the instructions. How long will it take the vaccine to generate an effective immune response for an individual? So generally speaking, it takes, at least a week or two after that second dose to develop adequate immunity, which is an important timeline for people to remember. And we'll talk a little bit more about how, once an individual gets a vaccine, this is not a time to take off the mask and throw a big party. And is an individual at risk of contracting COVID in the time period between the first and second doses? So, as we talked about earlier, you need that second dose to allow that initially primed immune system to be boosted to provide, a sufficient, hopefully long-lasting response. So this is a quick graphic from the Pfizer study that, this was following individuals after just one dose. And as you can see, the red dots are people who got the placebo, the blue dots, blue line, are people who got that first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And these are people who got COVID after receiving either placebo or that first dose. The, lines kind of follow one another for the first 7 to 14 days or the first week or two, and then they start tapering off. And you can see that, within this subgroup, 50 individuals who got that first dose ultimately acquired COVID compared to 275 in the placebo group. So again, further demonstrates that on the one hand, one dose can provide some protection, 2 doses is going to provide much better protection, but there is that lag time that people need to be aware of. If I've already had COVID-19, do I still need the vaccine? So we still don't have enough information currently available, to say how long that immunity is going to last, that natural immunity is going to last to protect you from getting COVID again. So we're going to need more time to fully determine that, is the short answer. But because we don't know how long that natural immunity lasts, and we assume that it's going to taper off, and furthermore, we've seen people who have evidence of reinfection, the current plan is to recommend and offer the vaccine to those who have recovered from COVID greater than 90 days ago. Is my family at risk of getting COVID from me even after I've been vaccinated, but they have not? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that we expect these vaccines to protect against more severe infection, but we're going to need more time to, further evaluate how long it may protect against mild or even asymptomatic infection, and determine, how well it works at preventing, true transmission. So again, this gets back to the fact that as we have individuals within our community, within our healthcare system, get the vaccine, that we're all going to need to continue using the same tools that we've been using, such as mask wearing, washing your hands, and using appropriate social distancing. Should I get the vaccine if I'm pregnant or breastfeeding? So we know that pregnant women are at increased risk of acquiring more severe or having more severe illness if they do acquire the virus or get COVID-19. And right now, we still have very limited information. Pregnant women were not included in the initial kind of phase 3 trials. There were 23 women who became pregnant during Pfizer's phase 3 trial, and half of those were in the vaccine group. None of them had adverse outcomes or significant side effects or issues. And early next week, we'll anticipate additional guidance from that advisory committee on immunization practices. And when they met in October, their thoughts were, and I think this will be continuing to be reflected in their further guidance that we'll get next week, is that breastfeeding would not be a contraindication to receiving the vaccine, and that pregnancy itself would likely be more of a precaution, but not a contraindication to getting the vaccine. And I think it's going to get back to that risk benefit discussion. So if you're a nurse who is pregnant or is thinking about getting pregnant, and you're working in a higher risk setting, whether that's you're an EMS provider, you're a nurse taking care of COVID patients on a daily basis, that's a high risk setting. And from my perspective and opinion, and the opinion from experts, that would likely indicate a need to get the vaccine, versus if you have the capacity to stay at home or employ more social distancing measures, it might be advisable to wait until we have some more information on this. Is the vaccine safe for children? So the short answer is that we need more time. The longer answer is that all of these vaccine companies are enrolling younger and younger individuals. So Pfizer's enrolling 12 to 15-year-olds. Moderna is registering a trial to enroll 12 to 18-year-olds. AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine company is testing children down to the 5-year age range globally. And then, it could be towards more of the end of 21 before we have information, going down to the infant level. The important caveat to that, again, within the risk benefit discussion, is that we know that kids are at less of a risk for more severe complications related to COVID at this point. So I think we have time to fully answer this question.